Frank. So I've been the Dean of the College of Ag and Natural Resources now for the last 4 years. Frank has been a faculty member in that college for how many years?
27 years.
27 years.
That's a light work.
We started before that, we're not going there.
And Frank, I've asked Frank to assume the role of facilitating conversation around the Agroecology Corridor. And so it's really taken on a life of its own. It's not something that I can do anymore, I mean, from the standpoint of really giving it justice. But initially, let me just share with you a little bit of background in terms of what got us to where we are right now, and then I'll go through a series of slides to give you an idea of what the concept, as to date, looks like. But keep in mind that all it is a concept at this stage of the game. So this thing is going to probably go through a lot of different morphological stages by the time it even sees the light of day. So this really started even before I got here. There was some discussion certainly within our own college in terms of rehabilitating the campus farm. So the small footprint that's occupied currently with the barns and this, that, and the other thing. And quite frankly, it's used very, very heavily by the Animal and Avian Science Department. Some of the other departments access it, but for the most part it's Animal and Avian Sciences. But they've reached a limit in terms of being able to actually utilize it effectively for teaching. It needs to be expanded. Certainly it's very old and antiquated. It doesn't really represent the university in the way that the university would like it represented. And in the course of conversations that I had had with the provost, Marianne Rankin, she certainly assured me that certainly during her tenure, because this is pretty valuable real estate, right, that it's occupying. But she's an entomologist, and so she understands agriculture. And she also understands the importance that agriculture plays to a land-grant mission. And the positive impact that a footprint like that can actually bring to a campus, to a university. A lot of students that walk by that don't know and understand agriculture still get warm fuzzies walking by there and seeing the sheep and the horses and that type of thing. So there are some benefits associated with that. So we had before I came, there was a capital campaign, long story, but there was a capital campaign that the college had been approved to move forward with in order to be able to redo the footprint. And there's some dollars that actually have been contributed to this. Now the overall dollar amount was estimated to be somewhere north of $10 or $15 million, right, in order to be able to do this. And there were about $500,000 that was contributed by various donors. Not long before I got here though, that campaign was put on almost permanent hold. Marianne felt that at least the concept or the idea for the footprint of the campus farm seemed to be very antiquated and outdated. All it was what I like to use the term, putting lipstick on a pig. In other words, it was just putting window dressing on something that was already fairly old, and it wasn't really representative of a 21st century campus, which is what is being certainly envisioned by Marianne, by Wallace, and by your previous dean, and by all of you, I'm sure. And I bring in David Conrad because he's actually been very helpful in terms of the thinking about all of this as well. So anyway, I was able to convince Marianne that if I were to put a team together of faculty that even expanded beyond the animal science group, and to be thinking about what a campus farm might look like writ broadly for a 21st century campus, would she be more amenable to considering allowing us to move forward with the rehab and the campaign and so forth? Yes, she was, put the team together, incorporated David Conrad into that conversation. Now, from an agricultural perspective, that's a big leap for us, right? Because we're a pretty closed society. We oftentimes don't bring in a lot of other people. We keep saying that agriculture is the fabric of society, and yet the fabric that we're dealing with is usually a little square around here. We exclude everybody else. The reality is that David brought with him, I think, some incredible thought that we hadn't really been considering before. So brought together some folks from Animal and Avian Sciences, brought together one of our landscape architects, some of you may know Dennis Nola, and then a few other folks around the table. And so we restricted our thinking initially to the footprint of the campus farm, thinking that maybe that's really where we were relegated to with regards to what the provost was thinking about. And David said, he said, think bigger than that. He says, you really need to be thinking big. This campus is thinking very, very big. And he said, think about what it is that you need from an educational perspective, and then also from a research perspective that you can't get right now because of the limitations of size. One of the reasons we had really restricted our thinking is that the campus farm, the way that it had been in the past, some of you may have been here during that time, actually occupied where the basketball arena is and beyond. And because of the growth of campus, it was reduced in size, reduced in size, reduced in size, and so that's really what we were thinking that we were dealing with. Instead, David had us thinking, he said, think about the campus not so much as a network of buildings that happens to have interstitial space with this green space, but think of it as green space that happens to have buildings on it. And boy, that made us think very, very differently in terms of the overall campus. Again, this is something you all do. This is part of your DNA. This is not something that we typically think about along these lines, but it did help us think very, very differently about how we might be able to utilize the campus as green space in interconnecting a lot of things that are currently happening on campus that, quite frankly, we're not even aware of. I mean, there's a lot of things here from an inventory standpoint, from sustainability, from soil health, urban forestry, wetlands, watershed management, and the like. Measurements that are being made on a daily basis by FM, by students in various classes, by researchers that we don't even know is existing. We've got green walls, we've got green roofs, we've got all sorts of things. And yet, they are multiple points that aren't necessarily interconnected. And what we're trying to do now, with the thinking that we've been working on this really for about a year and a half, is that how can we begin interconnecting all of this campus, the rich resources that we have on this campus, in a way that multiple disciplines can use. It's not just agriculture and natural resources, where we can use it for teaching, we can use it for demonstrations, we can work with the local communities, we can actually do research in some of these areas and so forth. So I'll go through this, but just to let you know, this has opened up a whole new world. Isn't that a song? This has opened up a whole new world, certainly for me. I'm a soil scientist working certainly mostly below ground, but learning who's doing sustainable work here on campus. We're meeting, putting names with lots of faces. Frank and I have been meeting with all sorts of folks. We met with pals here. We met with the head of the Arboretum. Had never met Karen Petrov before. We actually, I think you were introduced to this at wasn't that the Sustainability Conference? Which was the first conference in probably a decade that brought everybody together. Had the opportunity to share this idea there as well. I've met with Scott Lupin and Mark Stewart and just a whole host of individuals, even dining services, they're very interested in this as well, right? It makes sense. But there are so many folks out there that really are very excited about the concept, and that's all what we're at right now is the concept, because what we're trying to do is figure out process now as well. So anyway, initially it was called the Campus Farms. We've converted it to the University of Maryland Agroecology Corridor. And again, that title could change as well. All of this is subject to feedback that we get. But we view this to be an opportunity to set University of Maryland College Park aside as a leader in sustainable food systems and natural resource preservation. Now that certainly represents our college, right? And that's really where we were coming from on this. But we're really looking at it from an ecosystem standpoint. We're looking at it from an environmental standpoint. We're looking at it, there is a relationship, and there's a huge human dimension associated with the relationship between food and the human being. And that has become certainly more clear and more apparent and more powerful, certainly over the last decade or more, where consumers are trying to understand their relationship with food and trying to sort out this concept of food and food development with the whole concept of natural resource preservation and environmental issues as well. And we feel that certainly our college certainly can be a driver in helping certainly our students understand this relationship and communities understand this relationship as well. After having conversations around this, talking to other universities along the Eastern Seaboard, the Eastern Seaboard views themselves as being the leader nationally from a regional perspective in the area of urban agriculture, urban food access, and the like because of the high population density that's here. So the University of Maryland is very unique in land-grant universities because we are in the middle of one of the most populated areas of the United States, and yet we're growing food, we're trying to make it accessible to people, and we're trying to preserve and conserve. So anyway, that's where we're at. We feel that it's incumbent upon us, certainly as leaders and educators, to connect the dots between the concept of food security and environmental sustainability in the face of these big grand challenges. World hunger, where we see here in the university, you've read these numbers, right? 20% of our students are food insecure. 20% of our students at the University of Maryland are food insecure. They go without food, or they limit the amount of food that they actually purchase so that they can pay tuition, they can come to the university. And the same is true with our staff. Over 20% of our staff are food insecure as well. Food safety and food security is a huge issue. I was dean at Colorado State University where we had the largest food safety outbreak that the United States had ever experienced. That was the listeria outbreak on cantaloupe, where it killed well over 100 individuals, and we had to figure out where was that, where was the listeria coming from, how did it get into the food system, what do we do to make sure it never happens again, how is it that we can make people feel very safe about purchasing cantaloupe in the future. Of course, it devastated the entire economy of that region. Climate change is huge. Everything that we do, we deal with climate smart agriculture. What does that mean? How does that translate into the resiliency of our ability to be able to provide food on a continuous basis in the future? Natural resource preservation. You know, it's interesting. We heard just recently that students, when they think about our college and the name of our college, we knew that the term agriculture may turn people off because they're so disconnected from the concept of agriculture and where their food comes from. We had no concept that the idea of natural resource was a turnoff for students. Does that surprise you at all? It surprises the heck out of me. But when they see the term natural resource, they think of it as raping the environment. That our college is about the production of food in an unsustainable way and about natural resource. How do we actually mine things? How do we destroy the... Had no concept of that whatsoever. We're hearing that from some of our students as well. So natural resource, did you know that?
No, it's the first time I heard it. It's surprising.
It is, it's surprising.
Yeah.
So somehow we've got to change that concept as well.
Very surprising.
And then the whole concept of human health, nutrition, and the like, I think is important as well. So we view that the university is an untapped resource, and our campus is a microcosm of the state's diverse ecology. You know, they call Maryland, what, America in the miniature? Mm-hmm. Well, the University of Maryland is, I don't know, it's something in the miniature, right? We got it all here. We got human, we got environment, we got ecology, and it is all here. So this is actually a living learning laboratory that we can use, and we haven't been doing this collectively, but I think we can. We can use it to address this concept of sustainability of food production and natural resource preservation. Maybe we want to change the term of natural resource preservation to something else. I don't know. But, you know, this is what resonates with my generation anyway. But you know, we've got a farmer's market here. I mean, we actually are producing food here. We've got raised beds over by the recreation facility. We've got an urban forest here. We've got vertical walls. We've got all sorts of things that your faculty and students have had influence in, our students and faculty have had influence in, students over in CMNS and engineering and the like have all at least had an interest in or have influence in implementing here as well. Let's see, did I go wrong? Oh, I gotta go back, don't I? So, this is where we begin thinking about our campus very differently. And this is what Dennis Nola actually put together. And when we saw this visually, it surprised us. Now, granted, some of the green there is athletic space and so forth, but the campus is truly a balance between the built and the natural. When you think about the buildings on the left side, and then you think about the green space on the right side. And of course, just to give you an idea, so this is what University Boulevard, this is over by the golf course up here in this region, up in this area here. This is the admin building, this is the library, and this must be you over here. It kind of gives you an idea of where we are. But you know, when you look at that, I mean, you can get so overwhelmed visually by the amount of building space here. You think that it's all concrete and built, and the reality is there's actually quite a bit of green space here. The goal then is to create an agroecology corridor to incorporate experiential learning and research opportunities. We underline this for all students at all levels at the University of Maryland. This is not a College of Ag and Natural Resource only effort. But we want to be a part of this, and we want to bring to the table folks that have creative ideas that we can begin mapping this thing out and developing ideas. Where can this actually lead to? And can we do this in phases? And what already exists and so forth. PALS, for instance, when we visited with PALS, you thought that maybe the students could actually do an inventory of maybe some of the things that are out there, right? That are already in existence because we don't have an inventory. I talked to Chris Phillips, for instance, over in FM, and I've talked to Mark Stewart. They don't really have a complete inventory of these things as well. So there's a lot of unknowns of things that are currently happening that are really good and exciting that we want to take advantage of. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. So this is again, just to kind of give you an idea, this is the campus. This is University Boulevard. I know I just had you there. You're over here, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, and this is Simon's over here. The campus farm is located right here. We've had, through our landscape architecture, Vicki Chance in particular has been involved in developing this EPA Rainworks Challenge, where she's gotten first place a couple of times, second place as well, first place, second place. This is the national effort along these lines. So there's some interesting things going on there. We have rooftop gardens. We certainly have nurseries. We have drawn in what could be an orchard of some kind over by the president's house, you know, where he has a big grass space, be an opportunity to actually plant some things that could be eaten. You certainly have an urban forest that's located here as well. There's some wetlands that are built in here. You've got the stream, the paint branch that comes through here. I mean, there's all sorts of points here that are so much part of the ecosystem that I think that either we've forgotten about it or we just haven't been thinking about the interconnection and of how all of these relate to each other. So, we're raising animals. How does that impact stream quality? How does that impact soil health? We're talking about, at the university, we're talking about by 2025 being carbon neutral. Well, a lot of that's going to be the purchasing of carbon credits because they're not going to be able to reach neutrality. Is there something that we can do through all of this in order to be able to measure the amount of carbon that we're actually capturing by the urban forests and by soils? Are there management practices that we can do along these lines that can actually help convert carbon, atmospheric carbon, to carbon that's captured back into the ground itself, back into the vegetation? There's all sorts of things that we could be looking at. So, this is, I call this Bullwinkle. Oh, there it is. No, come on. Let me go back.
Yeah, you can just use.
There we go. So when you look at the area that was outlined in red, you separate everything else, it looks like Bullwinkle the moose, right?
Where's squirrel in the bottom?
There's a squirrel, yeah. Oh. And this is more for talking points than anything else, and identifying where some of these locations are. But there was the concept of foraging training, you know, having students walking through the forest and learning how to actually identify edible kinds of things that they can actually use to forage. The urban forestry research, again, in this area. Rebuilding a stream, sustainability park, which is a concept more than anything else. A former nursery, equine sustainable ag demo, campus farm, which is, again, over in this area here. Potential of doing turtle research, wetland research, turf grass research, which is already ongoing. We have one of our research experiment stations that's co-located just adjacent to the campus farm proper. So this is roughly, and I haven't done the actual calculation of the total acres that we're talking about here, but I'm assuming it's somewhere between 250 and 300 acres. But it also doesn't include all the other kinds of things that are happening through the rest of campus as well. This was the first concept that was presented. So the team that was put together, Dennis, also Sarah Balcom, were very influential in putting together this original concept. We think that it's a unique concept of a university within a green space rather than green spaces within a university. It gets our students thinking very, very differently as well. How do you begin utilizing space that, quite frankly, is underutilized in an environmentally sustainable way? So it stimulates conversations around food justice, sustainable environments, interdisciplinary problem solving. I can see where engineering students would be working with architecture and agriculture students, working on robotics and microsensors and the like, dealing with all sorts of things that I can't even imagine. This is, we think, we're making a picture, it is the single concept that can bring all disciplines together around common issues that are social, economic, behavioral, architectural, agricultural, public policy, public health, art, culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing that's limiting our thinking along these lines. It's a 21st century approach, so this gets back to what Mary Ann was talking about, that, you know, our original thinking was that it didn't really reflect a 21st century campus, and that's not where the campus wants to be. This is not our campus, by the way. But it is intended to develop and test cutting-edge technologies. One of the things we are pushing in our college, we started about 3 years ago, is an innovation and entrepreneurial effort, as many colleges are doing and schools are doing. Trying to get our students thinking differently, rather than just going to class regurgitating what they've learned, by taking some of the concepts that they've learned and translating it into something new and novel. And what's the platform for allowing them to do that? This is one platform that can actually do that, and to bring other students around the table in teams other than ag and natural resource students, right? Because again, it's a matter of bringing diverse thought and diverse sets of eyes around problems in order to be able to come up with unique solutions. And we've got to be able to do that. I mean, quite frankly, I recently came back from Africa. I was there for a couple of weeks. We're really trying to work with a number of different agencies in Africa, in particular sub-Saharan Africa, to help advance food security in some of the poorest regions of the world. Right? They can't, I mean, you know, when the average income of some of these populations is less than $1 a day, and it's horrible. But we can't do this incrementally anymore. We've got to leapfrog. And to do that, it requires partnerships, it requires diversity in thought, in approaching problems in ways that we really haven't been able to do that in the past. So this is intended to challenge innovative approaches by our students in order to produce food, to monitor environmental responses, preserve our natural resources, to assess the human condition and the human dimension. It's intended to facilitate multidisciplinary approaches to these global grand challenges and to reinforce the human connection to the food system in a way that individuals haven't in the past, where they are now part of the solution rather than identifying problems and leaving it to others. We think that University of Maryland can be the leader and should be the leader, and quite frankly, I think that they already are, without actually planting a flag in the ground, be a leader in the concept of urban food systems. It allows us to be the most recognizable source of information about urban agriculture and the urban food system. It allows us to develop new approaches and techniques to food production in urban environments. We can influence the elimination of food deserts and the improvement of access to fresh and locally produced food, increase food literacy within the urban environment, which is really bad. I mean, it's really bad. People think that they understand concepts about food, and they don't. They get it from commercials, and they get it from, you know, all sorts of things. And then this is where students can actually play an educational role. When I see students out in this agroecology corridor, and they're given tours, and they're developing kiosks, and self-regulated tours, and those kinds of things, and to create a sense of self-worth through the dignity of work. So the concept of workforce development is something that I think that we can incorporate in this as well. Talking to the mayor, we've talked several times with the mayor of College Park. College Park wants to redefine themselves as a major food hub. They don't know exactly how to do that. We've been talking to them, certainly over the last couple of years, about, you know, some of the things we can do from extension and so forth. This is a perfect way to get them involved in developing that whole concept in workforce development. Corridor supports campus and college initiatives. The university, it supports the concept of the university being a do-good institute. The concept of innovation and entrepreneurship. We've talked to Dean Chang, for instance, over in the Academy for Innovation and Entrepreneur. He's very interested, excited about this. It does reflect our land-grant mission, which is a variety of things, but certainly working with our state citizens in order to advance their lives and livelihoods and improve their lives. Our focus would be on eliminating hunger, preserving our natural resources, improving the quality of life. And then with regards to our own college, these are our strategic initiatives within the college. We've developed 5 of these. We've been working with Mitch Owen, I think. Are you working with, or have you worked with, or did you reach out to Mitch?
I reached out.
Reach out to Mitch. Mitch helped us with our thinking in terms of developing a shared vision within the college. Just briefly, in no particular order, that's why we've got them in a circle like this: establishing a healthy food system and ensuring global food and nutritional security, ensuring a clean and healthy Chesapeake Bay, advancing innovative, profitable, and sustainable ag production systems, improving human, animal, and environmental health, and then optimizing urban environments through design, green technology, and community engagement. And so all of those are positively impacted by this agroecology corridor. And then our current efforts, we've gotten the green light for Marianne to restart the capital campaign for the animal production sector, but that is in context of the agroecology corridor. It's not a standalone. We're moving this in phases now. And now we're redesigning, this is the old design. We're rethinking what that design ought to look like. Developing designs for modeling the ag quad. So when you look at in animal science, the building of animal science, if you've ever been in that area, maybe during Maryland Day, there's a lot of green space just inside where that building is, and it's surrounded by other buildings as well. Environmental Science and Technology, which is your department as well. That green space is, I mean, it is about as old and ugly as you can possibly think about it. And what we want to do, that's got to be part of the agroecology. How can we use that from an educational perspective? How can we redesign that? And so Carlo Colella, we've presented this to Carlo with Chris Phillips, who is his second in command, with Marianne, with David. Carlo got up here and he says, yeah, he says, we could do this, that, and the other thing. I mean, he was getting really excited about this, which really surprised that guy. If you know Carlo didn't get excited about anything that isn't his idea. And he was really excited about this. But he asked Chris then to work with us in developing and redesigning the ag quad, which I think is really exciting. Which means then, it's implying to me anyway, that the university will certainly help fund that or provide significant funding. And then we're currently in the process of presenting this concept to several groups on campus, just to see if there's an interest and excitement. Actually, the first group, after visiting with Marianne and Carlo, was pals. Right? We had that conversation, which was very helpful from our perspective. You gave us some great ideas.
And I'm really excited about the ideas. The idea of using pals for this. There's so many possibilities.
Well, we also were talking, we were visiting with Mark Stewart, and there's a sustainability fund that we're going to go ahead and apply for, and a student fee fund, and we're looking at all different sources of resources just to get the planning going, and maybe doing inventory and doing some of the fundamentals at this stage of the game. You know, one of the questions that we get is, well, where's the money going to come from for this? We're going to be self-funding some of it. I've dedicated $3 million of college dollars to the capital campaign for the animal production sector, hoping then that we can get matching dollars on that, maybe we can triple it and so forth, and begin moving on that. But you know, I don't know where the dollars are going to come from. We're thinking that if we can come up with a three-dimensional flyover of what this might look like and get prospective donors excited about this and wanting to be part of this in a way, I think that with good ideas mapped out in a way that truly resonates from a social, economic, environmental perspective, we can get a lot of people excited about this. Anyway, that's my spiel. And I'll be happy to add, yeah.
Well, one of the things, the diagrams that struck me as both symptomatic and potentially problematic, it was the diagram that Dennis did of the hard surface, parking lots, buildings, all the stuff that was not contributory to the environmental natural systems. And in a way, then the Bullwinkle diagram that followed that was following on the footsteps of this and saying how can we strengthen the green. And as I think about it, you know, I think indeed looking at the Bullwinkle thing and trying to strengthen the green is absolutely a mandate for us. As I was looking at the diagram, I was reminded of the campus plans that Frederick Law Olmsted did, which were typically for land-grant institutions right around the time that land-grant was first established, right in the 1870s or so, that the he had some commissions for those things. And almost all those plans failed because he never considered buildings. He was doing these great, wonderful landscapes. The landscapes were going to be redemptive, and there was no place to put buildings in those landscapes. I think as we approach another iteration of the campus master plan, that the two need to be woven together. That we need to get beyond the thinking of it as green versus black.
Either or.
And we need to think about ways that these things weave together in a more productive and symbiotic way. And I think that this is, I've heard rumblings that we're going to be doing a campus master plan in the very near future. And I think you're positioning yourself from the green side to really push that process so that it is something that there's lots of interweaving of the two, and it's hard to extract green from the black.
Good point, and maybe we need to somehow show that there's this blending between the two instead of showing them as separate entities, right?
Yeah.
I think Dennis did that for our own benefit,
Yeah.
just from the standpoint of a concept that, hey, you got a lot of green space here, but in terms of messaging, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we're dealing with, well, you know architecturally from a building standpoint, all the benefits that occur as a result of the design that could occur with building. Example, I mean, you know, again, I'm a novice, but I'm not an architect, right? But I remember Vicki Chance, I mean, she was, one of her student groups were developing a parking lot, for instance, right? It was supposed to be permeable, thank you, and also have solar. And also have, I mean, these kinds of things, right? I mean, how can we begin thinking that, because that is part of the agroecology corridor. How can we begin thinking differently about how we utilize buildings?
And with the advent of the purple line and with autonomous vehicles, all of lot 1 is not a given. That's going to change, and how can that change to sort of reinforce this notion of building architecture and building landscape to be something that works together rather than in opposition with one another. Yeah.
You know, the other thing that's interesting is that when we presented this to Carlo, so Campus Farm, this is the, I think this is the Xfinity Center, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Right here.
The big
The
black
big one, right below.
Here?
No.
No.
Here.
Further down.
Here,
There.
okay, thank you. That's the Xfinity Center. Anyway, so Mary Ann was a little concerned because, there is this campus design, and Carlo's been involved in this. I'm not making Carlo out to be the bad guy. Carlo's actually quite good, and he's been very helpful along these lines. But she was concerned because she knew that Carlo had an idea about possibly putting a practice facility here for basketball. He said, well, that's going to cut everything off, right? Well, when Carlos saw this, he looked at it and he says, hey, he says, we're thinking about putting a practice field here, he says, or a practice facility here for basketball. He says, so your trail could go, I mean, he was still accommodating what we were trying to do here, given the existence of this campus master plan. So number one, it sensitized me to the fact that we need to be talking to people who know about this master plan.
Yeah.
And then how can we do what we're trying to do and at the same time influence the master plan in a positive sort of way. The other thing, though, that we're kind of at a loss for right now, we do have a meeting coming up in another week or two, I think, around the agroecology corridor,
next week.
with just a handful of people to really talk about process. In other words, who needs to be around the table initially to really become the brain trust to help us figure out what's the process is everything. I mean, you can come up with a great idea, but if you don't do it right, nobody's going to get on the bandwagon with you, right? So what we're trying to do right now is just to figure out what are the next steps. Who needs to be at that table? So, yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you've had any discussions with Ken Ullman and what's going on in the Discovery District. I mean, there's gobs of land over there.
Right, yeah.
That could be used.
Only from a different project that we were working on, and that was to try to keep USDA, National Institute for Food and Agriculture, here in the Washington, D.C. area. We put a proposal together with Ken and sent it to the headquarters of USDA, actually the Secretary of Agriculture, working over in the Discovery District. That's been the limitation of the car. It hasn't been in concert with this. Quite frankly, we haven't really gone public with this too much because when we do, we want to make sure that we got it right. I haven't presented it to the deans. Don is the only one that really has seen this, and I don't want to yet, because I'm not ready for them to dig their heels in the ground and say, wait a minute.
I'm sorry to go back to this topic again, but the hard edges around the green too, between our property and the adjacent boundaries. So I think that one of the things that, as well, that we ought to be thinking about, yes, what do we control, but how does this feather and how do we communicate the need to work collaboratively with the surrounding communities and the surrounding institutions to make sure that this ecosystem isn't just a little microcosm that we make, but it's all part of something bigger. So for example, Paint Branch. 1995, we did a master plan for the engineering sciences part of campus, discovering that Paint Branch, empties into the Anacostia, and that we were contributing significantly to the warming of Paint Branch. At the time, one of the few trout streams in this part of Maryland, and that it was largely the runoff of those parking lots. Well, over the years, and thinking about this in a much more global sense, the campus has come to realize that we need buffers against Paint Branch, and Paint Branch often will flood. And so all that development on the lower edge, along the edge of Paint Branch, has really been stuff that's been part of a more regional sense about what that stream was. When I first came to campus 32 years ago, the idea was, how can we make that stream go away and make productive property on top of it? Now it's the opposite. How can we work together with it and put uses alongside of that help to contribute to the health of the stream and to the benefit of the campus?
Right.
Yeah.
So reaching out to the community is going to be fundamentally important. I did have a conversation with Andy Fellows about this. Andy's also trying to think about reaching out to the communities and that standpoint.
Right, because you've got, we really do have a kind of green connection that goes right down all the way to the Anacostia.
Yeah.
Right.
And
and people don't recognize that. They don't realize that.
Well, exactly.
And it ties back to your initiative of this Chesapeake Bay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah, that's right.
And, but I do like that idea of not creating these hard boundaries. In a sense, there's sort of cultural and natural ecotones between the corridor and the neighborhoods, and
Right.
that all of that is integrated.
Ultimately, down the road, when we have some miles underneath of us, the corridor won't be a physical place. It's going to be a concept. And we will have entities, whether it's communities or buildings or green spaces, that become part of the family that is the corridor, and places that we're still working to get them to a situation where they can be. I don't know if we hand out awards to communities, or we hand out some kind of recognition, or we hand out be part of what we have going on here. But that's what we want to do.
It could be part of Sustainable Maryland.
Sustainable Maryland.
Exactly.
We already have a program.
Oh, you do?
Through the environmental
We have a
finance.
sustainability certification program for municipalities in the state, and the majority of the communities surrounding the campus are engaged in that program, so that would be a natural vehicle for communicating what y'all are interested in doing beyond the boundaries of the campus.
And we do bump into several different communities.
Yep.
Oh,
And we can work with all of them.
And you really go all the way down to the port towns if you take it all the way down to the Anacostia. So,
I knew that the message was resonating when one of the individuals that was sitting in that room the very first time said, number one, the people that we hire in the future to be able to manage landscapes around here need to be trained very differently. They're very, very different in the way that they look at plant material, where it should go, what it should do, the function. So instead of looking at the landscape as merely aesthetics, now we look at it as a functional landscape, right? And that is very different in terms of how you manage that and what you plant there and those kinds of things. And then he said, as an example, with the Arib Center, he says, all those plants that were planted on the outside of the Arib Center, that was very nice. He said, they look really nice. He said, but why weren't they orchards? Why weren't they something that students could manage, you could actually use for food in order to be able to address food insecurity here on campus? I mean, there was all sorts of things that, all of a sudden the green light went on.
green light.
The green light.
The green.
That's right.
We're going to green light.
And just to follow on to Maria's comment about the Discovery Zone, PAL's main partner for this year is Park and Planning within Prince George's County. And they have a huge park over by that area.
Oh, it's
And they-
adjacent, yeah,
and
it's
they've
the one that
asked us-
connects right there.
Yeah, and they've asked us to, to work on connecting that in, both with campus and with the surrounding community. So you're figuring out who to have at the table. I don't envy you that task, because there are so many people that would have an interest in this, but it's gonna be hard to figure out how to manage those folks at the table, but
But
when
if
you're
you all have
ready-
suggestions, we're here to listen. I mean,
Yeah, and I think once you're ready to roll things out, that's where like EFC and PALS and the real estate program and architecture, that's where we can all help you identify people who would be chomping at the bit to contribute.
I think Dennis can certainly help you with this, but I think having an open charrette process. So the charrette is an intensive design workshop where you invite people from various sectors with various concerns, even the general public at some point in time, to participate. And it has a way of being constructive with ideas rather than destructive. So, instead of showing up and saying, here's my plan, and you guys tear it apart, it's here's a series of principles that we're talking about. Let's imagine how they could be realized. Let's see if they have traction. Let's see what new principles can come out of this thing. And it tends to be inclusive, and it tends to be more synthetic than analytic and tearing something apart. And so charrettes are, I think most of us that do urban design, that do campus planning, find that to be the best route to go, to bring people together in a constructive dialogue, where they feel like you're most successful when somebody on the other side of the table feels like it's their idea.
Right.
Even though you might have had that idea, it's better to let them have it.
It still comes down to process, right?
Yeah.
And
Writing the
there's-
process down there.
There's fearless ideation money that would support
Yeah.
the charrette.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, that's exciting. I've never heard of one of those things before.
We do them all the time in real estate development when we work with governmental entities.
Or with communities.
Or with
Yeah.
communities.
Yeah, we've done community.
Great.
This is
I
kind of.
mean, you can actually have
Yeah.
a series, you might even have a series of them,
Yeah.
where you focus on
Yeah.
governmental agencies, you focus on campus players, you focus on the surrounding communities and the public, and then maybe, bring people from those into sort of a.
But this isn't just a facilitated discussion, right?
No, I mean,
They're
they're
actually
maps on the
providing
table and they
designs.
get, yeah, they're doing,
Yeah,
they're working and drawing out their ideas.
great.
Yeah.
Do you have one of these on the docket coming up soon, where we could actually
But you would design it around this.
observe?
They have to be
Plan.
custom tailored
Yeah.
to.
No, I was just gonna say, observe how you do this.
Oh,
Even the landscape architects do this.
Oh, do they
Yeah,
really?
so-
yeah,
Yeah.
landscape architecture
There you
firms
go.
do this, yeah.
We just did one for Landover Mall, the site in Landover Mall. We don't have that coming up though.
And you get a lot of people that come and participate?
It depends on the site and the interest from the community. But yeah, I mean, we've had some where we've had hundreds of people.
That's, I like it.
And they come with a lot of ideas.
Yeah.
A lot of opinions.
That's not very good. Well, good, I don't wanna take up a lot of your time, but
No.
anything else, or how does this resonate with folks?
That's a great idea. Yeah, as I said, and I think it's something that, that our school would really be interested in, from a whole bunch of different perspectives.
So I'm just wondering about the potential for, obviously this will have very spatial, growing limiting, it'll start kind of on a limited basis and maybe it expands and there are campus-wide implications, but I would love to see, this start to put pressure onto all the turf grass and the sterile green blank areas. It would be so great to see that transformed to more useful, functional, ecologically valuable green spaces that aren't just within the corridor or whatever becomes
Right.
near-term projects.
And the educational component of small actions, I think, can be tremendous as we witness students, how they learn walking up and down the sidewalks. The example you used recently about, I'm looking at past you out the window here at the potted plants in the area out there. Why shouldn't they be edible? Why not? Why can't they be? And that's a very passive educational message that we grow things that we can eat, and we grow things that sustain the community, and they can be right there. That's.
I'm willing to commit and give them to be the first
All right.
demonstration.
That'll be the model, right there.
Right there.
That's right. Oh, very
We're
good.
there.
Good. Well, thank you, Jen, thank you for inviting us, I appreciate that. as
Well,
well.
thank you guys for coming so much.
And we will definitely be
please-
keeping you
yeah,
in
right.
contact, you know,
Good.
as we move
Good.
forward. with this. Your input is
Yeah.
gonna be incredibly valuable as we figure out who needs to be around that. David Cronrath will be he'll be part of that initial conversation, right? So architectural concepts will be there. But we're not gonna limit the discussion just to that group. That group is primarily the group where we're gonna be asking who needs to be around the table, so, good. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.